Some people believe that 3 a.m. is just another hour of the night. But those who have lived through it know better. They say that at this hour, the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin. That if you wake up suddenly and feel someone standing very close, you should never open your eyes. This is a story passed from tenant to tenant. A story about a room at the end of a hallway. And about the woman who stands at the foot of the bed at 3 a.m. Chapter 1. The room that could not hold sleep. I moved into that rented room on a late weekend afternoon, just as the city was entering a stretch of endless rain. The narrow alley leading to the boarding house was barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. Rainwater pooled into dark puddles, reflecting the pale glow of streetlights like unblinking eyes staring back from the ground. The room was at the very end of the corridor, separated from the others. The wooden door was old, its handle rusted, and when I pushed it open, it let out a dry creaking sound that sent a chill through me. The air inside was colder than outside, even though the window was slightly open. A damp, musty smell lingered in the room, mixed with something faintly sour, like old fabric left too long without sunlight. The landlord was a man in his 50s, thin, with a slightly hunched back. He avoided looking directly at me as he showed me the room. His eyes kept drifting toward the foot of the bed, where there was nothing but empty space and a wall stained with old watermarks. "This room is quiet," he said briefly. I asked casually, "Did anyone live here long before?" He was silent for a few seconds, then replied in a low voice, "At night, you should sleep early. Don't stay up too late." The comment confused me, but I was desperate for a place to stay, so I didn't press further. I told myself that old people often spoke in strange, vague ways. The first night passed without incident. I slept deeply, without dreams, but on the second night, when the city had sunk into complete silence, I suddenly woke up. Not because of a noise. Not because of a nightmare. It was a familiar yet indescribable feeling. The feeling that someone was watching me. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. The screen lit up. 3 a.m. My heart began to beat faster. The room was so silent that I could hear my own breathing clearly. There was no wind, no traffic noise, nothing at all. And then I realized what made the chill crawl up my spine. That feeling was not a dream. It was like knowing, with absolute certainty, that someone was standing very close, so close that the moment you opened your eyes, you would see them. I lay completely still, my eyes shut tight, afraid to move. A strange thought echoed in my head. Don't open your eyes. But I did. Chapter 2. Someone standing at the foot of the bed. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was not the familiar ceiling. It was a human figure standing rigidly at the foot of my bed. The distance between us wasn't far, no more than 2 meters. Dim street light filtered through the small window, just enough for me to make out the shape of a woman standing with her back toward me. She stood unnaturally straight, her arms hanging loosely at her sides, completely motionless, like a statue abandoned in the dark. For the first few seconds, fear didn't hit me yet. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A burglar. Someone who had entered the wrong room. Or, at worst, I was still dreaming. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became that none of those explanations fit. She stood still for far too long. Too still. There was no sound of breathing, no rustle of fabric, no sign of a living presence. Her hair was long and black, spilling down her back, covering the nape of her neck. She wore a dark, old dress, the hem frayed and ragged, as if it had been soaked in water for a very long time. I wanted to sit up. I wanted to scream. But my body refused to obey. My arms and legs felt unbearably heavy, as though something was pressing me down into the mattress. My throat was dry, locked tight, unable to produce even the faintest sound. A terrifying thought crept into my mind. If she's a real person, why hasn't she reacted to the fact that I'm awake? The air in the room grew colder, noticeably so. I could feel the chill brushing against my skin, carrying with it the musty smell from earlier, now mixed with a faint metallic scent, like rust. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them again, everything would disappear. Then I heard a sound. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't breathing. It was the soft scrape of fabric against the floor, as if the woman had shifted, just slightly. My heart slammed against my ribs, so loud I feared she could hear it. I didn't dare open my eyes, yet a deeper terror settled over me. She was closer than before. I knew it without looking, because at the foot of the bed, right where my feet rested, the air turned bitingly cold, as if something had stepped into an invisible boundary around me. And then a thought appeared in my mind, not loud, not rushed, but chillingly certain. She is waiting for me to fully wake up.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The shadow that did not belong to anyone. I don't know how long I lay there without moving. It could have been only a few seconds. It could have been several minutes. Time inside that moment felt distorted, stretched thin in a way that didn't follow any normal rule. Then, suddenly, the crushing weight on my body disappeared. I could move again. Without thinking, I jerked upright and fumbled for the light switch on the wall. My fingers were shaking so badly that it took me 2 tries before I found it. When the switch finally clicked, the fluorescent light flickered several times before turning fully on. I held my breath. The room was empty. No woman. No figure at the foot of the bed. Nothing but the unmade mattress and the stained wall I had seen in daylight. I let out a long, shaky breath, my back soaked in cold sweat. My mind rushed to reassure itself, sleep paralysis, a nightmare, stress, exhaustion, anything that made sense. But before my heartbeat could slow, I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. Under the bright light, my shadow stretched long across the tiled floor. But at the foot of the bed, there was no second shadow. At first, that might sound normal, but if someone, anyone, had truly been standing there just moments ago, their shadow should have lingered on the floor, even for a brief instant when the light came on. There was nothing. The tiles were bare, empty, coldly so. I stood frozen, staring at the floor, goosebumps crawling up my spine. The light was on, yet the room felt no warmer. If anything, it felt as though the warmth had been drained away, leaving behind a hollow chill. I stepped slowly toward the foot of the bed. Right beside it, on the old mattress, there was a long, deep indentation, as if someone had been standing there for a very long time, long enough for their weight to sink into the worn foam. I reached out and touched it. Cold. Not the coolness of air or fabric, but a cold that numbed my fingertips instantly, like touching metal left outside in the rain all night. I pulled my hand back at once. In that moment, a terrifying thought formed in my mind, slow but undeniable. If this was only a dream, why did the room leave a trace? I scanned the room again. The door was still locked from the inside. The window was tightly shut. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign that anyone had come or gone. And yet, the most unsettling thing was not the indentation on the mattress. It was the feeling that, even though I could no longer see her, I was not alone. Chapter 4. The face that turned, slowly. I didn't sleep again after that night. Even when dawn crept close, I sat with my back against the wall, eyes fixed on the foot of the bed. The light stayed on until morning. I was afraid of the dark, but even more afraid that if the light went out, something would appear again in that exact spot, silently waiting for me to open my eyes. The next day, exhaustion wrapped around my head like a vice. My thoughts were sluggish, my body heavy. Yet when night fell, sleep still came, unavoidable and crushing. I told myself I had to rest. If I didn't, I would lose my mind before I ever understood what was happening in that room. I went to bed early. The light stayed on. I pulled the blanket up to my chest. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, as if to reassure me that time was still moving, at least for now. I don't remember when I fell asleep. I only know that when my awareness returned, the room had sunk into that familiar, deathly silence. I didn't need to check the clock. 3 a.m. The cold sensation slid down my spine, slow and deliberate, like invisible fingers tracing each vertebra. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding, and just as I feared, she was there again, standing at the foot of the bed. The same figure. The same long hair covering her back. The same suffocating stillness. But something was different this time. She was not completely motionless. I saw it clearly. Her head was moving. Not snapping, not jerking. It turned inch by inch. Painfully slow, stiff, as if her neck had rusted solid long ago and every movement demanded effort. A faint sound filled the air. Crack, crack? Soft, but distinct enough that I heard every tiny shift. I wanted to shut my eyes, to turn away. But my body was frozen, as though every command from my mind had been cut off. When her face finally came into view beneath the dim light, my stomach clenched. Her skin was pale and waxy, stretched tight like hardened candle wax. Her mouth was sealed shut, drawn into an unnatural straight line, as if it had been pressed closed for far too long. But what nearly stopped my breathing were her eyes. No whites, no reflection, only two deep black hollows, staring straight into me. She looked at me for a long time. Then her lips twitched slightly. No sound came out, but I heard her clearly inside my head. "You can see me now." A wave of cold crashed through me, from the top of my head to the soles of my feet. In that moment, I knew the fear had crossed a line. This was no hallucination, no nightmare. And the most terrifying part was this. She knew I was awake.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Handprints on the Bedsheet. I woke up the next morning completely drained, as if I had just come out of a long, burning fever. My head throbbed, my throat was dry, and my entire body felt heavy and sore, even though I hadn't moved at all during the night. Weak sunlight slipped through the window, making the room look deceptively normal, almost convincing enough to believe that everything from the night before had only been the product of a broken mind. I almost believed it, until I pulled back the blanket. On the gray bedsheet, right at the foot of the bed, exactly where she always stood, there were handprints. They weren't clear, like mud or dirt. They were dark, bruised-looking stains, faint but unmistakable, as if something had pressed down hard enough to leave marks in the fabric itself. 5 long, thin fingers. The prints were angled inward, pointing directly toward me. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard my ears rang. I held my hand over one of the marks. It was bigger than mine, though not by much, the size of a thin woman's hand, a woman who looked malnourished, lifeless. I touched the print. Cold. Not the cold of damp cloth, but a sharp, biting chill that made me jerk my hand back instantly, like I had touched something that should not exist in daylight. I searched the room. The door was still locked. The window was still bolted shut. There were no signs of forced entry. No evidence that anyone had been inside. And yet, the feeling was undeniable. This room no longer belonged to me alone. I couldn't stay there during the day. I wandered outside, drifting through the narrow alley, trying to absorb some sense of life from the world beyond those walls. But wherever I went, I felt eyes on my back, cold, patient, watching. Around noon, I returned to grab a few things. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The pillow I had left neatly in place that morning had been turned around. Not thrown, not disturbed violently, just slightly repositioned, enough to tell me that something had been there while I was gone. That night, I finally spoke to the woman in the next room. When I mentioned strange things happening at night, her face drained of color. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "You've seen her too, haven't you?" My blood ran cold, because I hadn't told her a single detail. Chapter 6. The woman WHO died at 3 a.m. The woman from the next room refused to talk in the hallway. She pulled me out to a small drink stall at the end of the alley, where there were lights and the distant noise of passing people. Even there, her voice trembled, as if she were afraid someone might overhear us. "You shouldn't stay in that room anymore," she said, gripping her glass tightly. "Everyone who stays there ends up like you." I asked her how she knew. She lowered her head and stayed silent for a long time before finally speaking. "Before I moved in, that room had changed tenants constantly. No one stayed longer than a few weeks. Some left in the middle of the night. Others returned the key the next morning, even though they had already paid for the whole month. There was only one reason. The woman. 3 years earlier, the room had been occupied by a woman named Han, who lived there with her son, not yet 2 years old. Her husband had left, no money, no messages, no return. Neighbors often heard arguments coming from the room. But there was only one adult voice, mixed with the sound of a baby screaming. That night, it rained heavily. At around 3 a.m., the entire boarding house heard a loud noise coming from the last room in the corridor. No one dared to go check. By early morning, after the rain had stopped, a strange metallic smell spread through the hallway. They forced the door open. The woman was found hanging at the foot of the bed, her feet nearly touching the floor. Her face was dark purple. Her eyes rolled back. But what left everyone frozen in place was the child. The baby had been shoved under the mattress. He suffocated to death. The woman beside me began to cry as she spoke. My throat tightened, as if an invisible hand were squeezing it shut. Since then, she whispered, every night at 3 a.m., someone sees her standing at the foot of the bed. At first, she faces away. Later, she turns around. And anyone who looks at her face for too long never sleeps peacefully again. I asked quietly, has anyone else died? She shook her head, but her eyes avoided mine. Not yet, but someone almost did. That night, I returned to the room with a heavy, sinking feeling in my chest. Everything suddenly made sense, horribly so. The foot of the bed wasn't random. It was where she died. And where the child never stood up again. When I lay down, the wall clock let out a soft click. The hour hand, the minute hand, the second hand, all stopped. At 3 o'clock, I didn't dare close my eyes. Because I knew that tonight, she wouldn't be standing there just to watch.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The Crying Beneath the Floor. I lay completely still on the bed, staring at the dim ceiling above me. The clock remained frozen at 3 a.m., as if time itself had been nailed to that moment. There was no ticking, no sound to suggest that the world was still moving forward. Then I heard it. Crying. At first, it was so faint it could have been mistaken for wind slipping through a crack. But within seconds, I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was the sound of a child crying, muffled and broken, each sob cut short as if a hand were covering its mouth. The sound did not echo through the room. It came from beneath the floor. My entire body stiffened. I didn't dare move. I didn't even dare breathe deeply. The tiled floor was ice cold. But now that cold seemed to rise from below, seeping through the bed frame, crawling into my bones. The crying grew clearer. It was the kind of sound a child makes when being strangled. No full cry. No strength left, only panic and pain trapped in a tiny chest. And then, at the foot of the bed, she appeared. I didn't need to look to know it. The air in the room suddenly grew heavy, as though something had stepped inside. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering. She stood there, but this time, her shoulders were trembling. I could see it clearly. She was crying. There were no sobs, no tears, just faint, continuous shudders running through her thin body. Her long hair fell forward, hiding most of her face. From her loosely hanging hands, dark liquid dripped onto the floor, spreading a faint metallic stench. The crying beneath the floor blended with the silence above, creating a suffocating stillness. And for the first time, my fear was no longer pure terror. It was mixed with something else. Something dangerously close to pity. She tilted her head, listening to the sound beneath us. Then, very softly, a broken voice filled my mind, not through my ears, but directly inside my head. He's still there. My heart dropped. He's so cold. No one is holding him. The crying suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard a new sound. Scratching beneath the floor, like tiny fingernails clawing at tile, desperately searching for a way out. My whole body began to shake. The child had never left this room. And the woman standing at the foot of my bed, she wasn't here just to scare me. She was looking for someone who could hear. Chapter 8. Don't look into her eyes. The next morning, I ran into the old woman who owned the small convenience stall at the entrance of the alley. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing as if she were examining something that did not belong to the living. Then she pulled me closer, lowering her voice until it nearly dissolved into the wind. "You heard it last night, didn't you?" I didn't answer. But I didn't need to. She sighed, the sharp scent of betel nut drifting from her breath. "Crying is still manageable," she murmured, "but once she looks straight at you, it's already over." I asked her what I should do. She shook her head slowly. "There's nothing you can do. Just remember one thing, don't look into her eyes. Anyone who does, gets chosen." I forced a weak smile. I didn't tell her that I already had. More than once. That night, I tried to follow her warning. I turned off the light early, faced the wall, and pulled the blanket over my head. I shut my eyes tight, trying to think of nothing at all. But at exactly 3 a.m., I felt something press against my chest. It wasn't heavy, but it was cold. An icy sensation spread from my breastbone down to my stomach, like a hand laid flat against me, pinning me in place. I tried to struggle, but my body wouldn't move. My breathing became shallow and frantic, each breath burning as if the air itself had turned to winter. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, slow, measured. She was coming closer. I didn't open my eyes. I couldn't, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that her face was hovering just above me, only inches away. A whisper slid into my ear, close enough that I felt the cold brush against my skin. "Don't hide." Suddenly, my neck was yanked sideways. It didn't hurt, but it was firm, decisive, as if an invisible hand had gripped my chin and forced my head to turn. I tried to resist, but my strength was no more than a child's. My eyelids trembled violently. I knew that if I opened them, I would see her. And once I did, there would be no turning back. But I lost. My eyes flew open. In that instant, I didn't see the room. I didn't see the bed. I didn't even see myself. All I saw were two bottomless black eyes, so deep they seemed capable of swallowing my consciousness whole. There was no hatred in them. No rage. Only a despair that had stretched on without end. Then, very softly, a thought that did not belong to me echoed inside my head. "You'll understand, when you're in my place." I began to cry. Not out of fear, but because, in that brief moment, the woman's pain poured straight into me.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Mother's Dream. I didn't wake up immediately after that night. My awareness drifted away, not into normal sleep, but into a strange, suspended state where I could no longer feel my own body. There was no weight, no lightness, only the sensation of being pulled away from myself. Then I heard crying. This time, it didn't come from beneath the floor. It was very close. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the rented room. I was sitting on a freezing floor, my back pressed against the side of the bed, my arms wrapped tightly around something that was squirming. A child. He was tiny, thin, his whole body trembling with cold. His cries were weak, trapped in his throat, as if they might disappear at any moment. I looked down at him, and my chest tightened. I knew this child. Not through my own memories, but through a familiarity that hurt. "Shish, it's okay, it's okay." The voice that came from my mouth made me freeze. It wasn't my voice. It was hoarse, exhausted, trembling, as if it had cried far too much. In that moment, I realized that in this dream, or whatever it was, I was no longer myself. I was the woman. The room was pitch black, lit only by the glow of a streetlight slipping through the window. Rain hammered against the tin roof, each drop striking like it was hitting my skull. The child in my arms wouldn't stop crying, each sob sharper, louder, tearing through what little sanity I had left. "Please, stop, please." I heard myself beg. But the child didn't understand. He was hungry. He was cold. And he was afraid. There was no one else in the room. No husband. No neighbors. No one to call for help. Only me, and a crying child who was losing his voice. A dark, desperate thought crept into my mind. If he would stop crying, if he would just be quiet, everything would be easier. I recoiled in horror at my own thought. I shook my head, clutched the child tighter, my tears falling hot against his forehead. No, I can't think like that. But the crying didn't stop. It grew louder, piercing the rain, piercing the thin walls of the room. I looked around. The foot of the bed. That familiar empty space. In that moment, I understood why the woman had stood there after her death. Because every decision had begun at that spot. I looked down at the child. Then darkness swallowed everything. Before it all collapsed, a voice echoed in my head, my own voice. Yet not mine at all. If my child can't survive, then no one needs to live on. I woke up screaming in the darkness. My pillow was soaked with tears. And I knew. I had just witnessed the most unforgivable moment of her life. Chapter 10. The woman WHO finally faced me. I woke up before sunrise. Pale gray light seeped through the window, spreading across the tiled floor in a cold, lifeless hue. I sat up abruptly, my chest tight and aching, as if something heavy had been pressing down on me all night. Every breath felt shallow, carrying the familiar damp smell of the room, a smell I had grown to hate. I knew something had changed since the night before. Not in the room, but inside me. All day long, the image of the child from the dream clung to my thoughts. His crying echoed in my head, pulsing with every heartbeat, and I realized something that frightened me more than the apparitions themselves. I was no longer afraid of the woman the way I used to be. In her place was a heavy, suffocating feeling, as if I had taken on a pain that did not belong to me. When night fell, I didn't turn on the light. I wanted to know whether she would still appear if I refused to look. At exactly 3 a.m., the air in the room shifted violently. The cold didn't creep in this time, it crashed down, like a soaked blanket thrown over my body. I opened my eyes. She was standing right beside the bed. Not at the foot anymore. The distance between us was so small that I could see every detail of her face. Her skin was gray and stretched tight, cracked like dried clay about to peel away. Her neck hung at an unnatural angle, a dark purple bruise running from her chin down her throat. Her tongue protruded, dark and shriveled. But what held me frozen was her gaze. No longer empty hollows. There was clarity in her eyes now, a cold, deliberate awareness. She looked at me the way one looks at something already claimed. She leaned down. Only a few centimeters separated our faces. I smelled something metallic and stale, mixed with the dampness of hair that had never fully dried. You understand now, don't you? Her voice echoed directly inside my head. I couldn't answer. She raised her hand. Long, thin fingers, blackened nails. That hand rested on my chest, not squeezing, not pressing, just resting there, like a statement of ownership. In that instant, I saw myself, standing at the foot of the bed. Not now, but in a future that felt terrifyingly close. She smiled. A crooked smile, full of pain, yet unmistakably relieved. It's almost your turn. I understood then. She didn't need me to die. She needed me to replace her.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The Child Under the Bed. I don't remember how I managed to fall asleep again after that night. All I know is that when my awareness returned, I was lying on my side, facing the space beneath the bed. My neck ached badly, as if it had been held in one position for far too long. The room was still dark, but not completely. It was that familiar gray haze that existed somewhere between deep night and early dawn. Then I heard something. Very faint. Scratch, scratch? The sound came from under the bed. My heart slammed violently, so hard I thought I might vomit. I tried to convince myself it was a rat, or the sound of wood contracting in the cold, but the scratching stopped, replaced by something far worse. Breathing. Short, broken, as if the lungs were too small to hold enough air. I held my breath without realizing it. My eyes were locked on the darkness beneath the bed, where the light could not reach. And then I saw it. A small hand slowly reached out. It was not the hand of a healthy child. It was thin and shriveled, the fingers bent at unnatural angles, the nails dark and discolored. The hand trembled as it gripped the edge of the bed, as if trying to pull the rest of the body up. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from screaming. Then part of a tiny face emerged from the shadows. Wide eyes, glossy with moisture, stared straight at me. There was no malice in them, no hatred, only fear and a plea for help. Its mouth moved, No sound came out. But inside my head, I heard it clearly. Cold. My entire body began to shake. I realized I was crying, tears soaking into my pillow without me noticing when they had started. I wanted to reach down. I wanted to touch him, to lift him up, the way I had in the mother's dream. But I couldn't. Because in that exact moment, I felt a presence behind my back. I didn't need to turn around. The woman was there. She was no longer standing close to the bed. She was no longer leaning over me. Instead, she was stepping back, slowly, retreating as if her role was coming to an end. I could feel it clearly, her presence growing thinner, colder, more distant. The child under the bed looked past me, toward her. His expression changed. The fear faded. What replaced it was expectation. A whisper filled my mind, no longer hers, and not entirely the child's either. Now, you're the one closest to him. In that moment, I understood something horrifying. The most terrifying thing was not the dead. It was that I was being dragged into the role of the mother. And when my trembling hand finally reached down and touched the child's ice-cold skin, I knew. I had crossed into the other half of the room. Chapter 12. The Ritual That Failed. I couldn't endure it any longer. The next morning, as sunlight barely revealed the water stains on the walls, I packed a few necessities and left the room. The cold sensation followed me, refusing to fade even when I stood among other people. I knew that if I didn't do something, I would soon stop being myself. The exorcist I was introduced to was a middle-aged man with a hollow face and sunken eyes, as if he had seen too many things that did not belong to the living. The moment he reached the doorway, he stopped and refused to step inside. "There is already someone here, who has taken the position," he said in a hoarse voice. A chill ran through me. I asked if there was still any way out. He sighed, shook his head, but finally began setting up the offerings: incense, water, joss paper, and a bowl of rice mixed with salt, placed carefully at the foot of the bed. The ritual began after night fell. The room filled with thick incense smoke. Candle flames flickered, casting twisted shadows on the walls. I sat inside a circle of rice, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The exorcist murmured incantations I couldn't understand, his voice growing more urgent with each line. At exactly 3 a.m., a gust of wind blew through the room, even though every door and window was tightly shut. The candles went out. The air grew heavy, thick, almost tangible. I heard a child crying right beside my feet. The cry was no longer weak. It was angry and panicked. The woman appeared, not at the foot of the bed. She stood behind me. I felt cold breath against the back of my neck, the familiar metallic stench flooding my senses. The exorcist panicked. His chanting broke apart as he flung rice and salt toward the foot of the bed. The grains fell straight to the floor, as if they had passed through empty air. A soft laugh echoed through the room. I couldn't tell whose it was. Too late. The words rang directly inside my head. The wall clock made a single, dry click. The second hand, the minute hand, the hour hand, all froze. At 3 o'clock, the exorcist staggered back, his face drained of color. He bowed deeply, almost kneeling. "I'm sorry," he said, though I didn't know whether he was speaking to me or to the presence filling the room. "It has already chosen." In that instant, I felt a small hand tighten around mine, ice cold. And in that moment of terror, I understood. The ritual hadn't failed because the exorcist was weak. It failed because what needed release had already found a replacement.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. When the woman began to disappear. After the failed ritual, the room grew unnaturally quiet. There were no more sudden waves of cold in the middle of the night. No more suffocating sensation of being watched when I turned my back. The woman no longer appeared, but her absence brought no relief. Instead, it felt like a hollow had been carved into the air itself, leaving the space warped and difficult to breathe in. I noticed the first change the next morning. When I looked into the mirror, my eyes appeared darker, sunken deeper than before. My gaze no longer felt focused. For a brief moment, I had the unsettling sense that I didn't recognize my own reflection, as if the face staring back at me was slowly drifting toward someone else. Night fell. The clock was still frozen at 3 a.m. I sat on the bed, gripping the edge of the blanket tightly. I knew she was no longer standing at the foot of the bed. But I also knew the room had never truly become empty. I heard a soft breath. Right beside me. I turned my head. The child was sitting there, leaning against the bed frame, his head lowered. He was no longer hiding beneath the bed, no longer buried in darkness. He was right next to me, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from his body. I didn't scream. I no longer had the strength to be afraid. The child lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were different from before. The panic was gone. The pleading was gone. What remained was a strange, unsettling familiarity, as if he had been looking at me this way for a very long time. Mom? The word did not pass through his lips. It echoed directly inside my mind. My body trembled. Not from the cold, but from understanding. The woman hadn't disappeared because she was freed. She disappeared because her role was finished. Her pain, her guilt, her despair had been transferred to me. I looked toward the foot of the bed. The place where she used to stand was now nothing but thin darkness. Yet for a brief instant, I saw a faint reflection on the wall. A woman standing there. Not her. Me. I turned away sharply, my heart racing. The child tilted his head, watching me closely, as if waiting for something that should have felt natural. I realized then, the thing that bound souls to this room had never been the rope around a neck. It was the bond between a mother and a child that could not be released. And now, I was the one holding his hand. Chapter 14. The night the room had no exit. I tried to leave that room. Not once, but many times. All within the same night. Each time I grabbed my bag, opened the door, and stepped into the damp corridor of the boarding house. I felt a brief, desperate sense of escape, but after only a few steps, the hallway lights would dim, the walls would blur like fog, and suddenly I was standing right in front of my own door again. The same old wooden door. The same rusted handle. There was no mistake. Panic finally set in. I banged on the door, shouted the landlord's name, called out for anyone who might hear me, but the sound seemed to vanish the moment they left my mouth. Swallowed by an empty void, the boarding house stretched endlessly in both directions, silent and abandoned, with no lights on anywhere, except the dull yellow glow waiting inside my room. I went back in. The child was sitting on the bed. He no longer trembled. His back was straighter now. His expression calm, as if this place had always belonged to him. I realized with a sickening certainty that the longer he stayed, the more he was settling into this existence. Go, I whispered, unsure of who I was speaking to. Let me leave. The child tilted his head. We're already here, where would you go? The question sounded natural, like something that shouldn't have needed asking. I staggered backward, my back hitting the wall. The water stains on the wall began to spread, running downward in distorted shapes. I stared at them, my heart tightening. Those stains looked exactly like a figure standing at the foot of the bed. Not one, but two. One tall, one small. I turned toward the foot of the bed. No one was standing there anymore, and yet the familiar cold remained, dense and heavy. I could feel it clearly now. The room was closing in. At exactly 3 a.m., the lights flickered violently. In the brief moments when the light went out and came back on, I saw my reflection in the wall mirror, but the figure in the mirror was standing half a step out of sync with me. When I raised my hand, the reflection followed, just a fraction of a second too late. Then the child appeared in the mirror, standing behind me. He placed his hand on my stomach, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A wave of cold spread through me, but it no longer made me shiver. What I felt instead was a deep, crushing exhaustion, as if I had lived in this room for far longer than I could remember. A thought surfaced, calm and disturbingly gentle. If you just stay, it will be over. Outside the window, dawn began to break, but the light did not enter the room. It stopped at the window frame, blocked by an invisible barrier. That was when I understood. Tonight was not meant to frighten me. Tonight was meant to erase the one who came before, and prepare the room for someone new.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The one standing at the foot of the bed. No one remembers exactly when I left that boarding house. In fact, no one seems to remember that I ever existed at all. My name no longer appears in the temporary residence records. My phone number cannot be reached. The people who once spoke to me recall only a vague impression, someone who might have rented the last room, but whenever they try to think more clearly, the memory slips away, like water through their fingers. The room is still there. The old wooden door. The stained walls. The empty space at the foot of the bed. The landlord still rents it out, always with the same words. This room is quiet, you should sleep early at night. What no one knows is that since that final night, the room no longer holds two spirits. It holds only one. I no longer see myself in the mirror the way I used to. The reflection has grown unfamiliar, paler, more hollow, the eyes carrying a fatigue without a name. I no longer feel hunger. I no longer know the difference between day and night. There is only 3 a.m. That hour has become the room's breathing. The child is still here. He no longer cries. He sleeps quietly beneath the thin blanket. I stand at the foot of the bed, watching him, exactly the way the woman before me once stood. Now I understand. The room was never haunted. What lingered here was a broken promise. The mother failed to keep her promise to protect her child. That guilt did not disappear with death. It needed another soul, someone weak enough, close enough, compassionate enough, to take her place. And I was there. One night, a new tenant moves in. A young man, exhausted, dragging a suitcase behind him, carrying the careless confidence of someone who believes he only needs a place to sleep. The first night passes without incident. On the second night, he wakes suddenly in the dark. That familiar sensation creeps in. The feeling that someone is standing very close. He opens his eyes. And he sees me. I am standing at the foot of the bed, my back turned to him, long hair covering my face. I do not move. I do not breathe. I only stand there, silent, patient. The young man holds his breath. His heart races. And in that moment, I know. The cycle has begun again. Because at exactly 3 a.m., in this room, there must always be a woman standing at the foot of the bed. If you are listening to this story late at night, and you happen to wake up at exactly 3 a.m., pay attention to the silence around you. Listen carefully. Feel the air at the foot of your bed. And if you sense that someone is standing there, do not look. Because once you see her, someone else may finally be allowed to leave.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.